what a memorable moment. I received a call from his right-hand person, Mary O'Connor, and here I was in Canada, in my apartment, and a call comes through. I'm calling from the Playboy Mansion, and I think, oh my gosh, Playboy Mansion, really, excuse me. And sure enough, and the reason she called is that Hefner, his favorite musician, is, of course, Bix Beiderbecke, and I had made this long feature film about Bix Beiderbecke, and he wanted to get a copy of it. And so I said to her, please ask him to send me a letter, because I didn't quite believe it. It was so incongruous. And a few days later, a letter arrived, and I sent him a movie, of course.
Yeah. And you met with him? How did the subject of making a film about his life and contributions come up?
I met him probably a year after I sent him the film. What also happened was that the Bix Beiderbecke film came out on the Playboy Jazz label, and it was featured at the Playboy Jazz Festival, film festival. And so I came down for that, and I met him for the first time, which was, it was quite something. Having the gates open, in front of the Playboy Mansion was quite extraordinary. This little kid from Hollywood, from Canada, comes to Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, he was truly, the only thing that he was that I knew about him was that he wore pajamas. In every other way, he was extremely bright, a very smart man, totally, and very charming, and knows movies inside out, knows music inside out. Many, many passions aside from women. And
right.
So that's when our friendship began, which lasted over quite a few years. And when he celebrated his 80th birthday party, I really wanted to attend that. I thought, this is one event I would like to go to and be at. And so I was invited and flew down with my partner and co-producer of the film, Victor Solnicki. And, there we were at this incredible party, glitz, glamour, painted women, just gorgeous, sumptuous. And it was beautiful. But I saw the Playboy. I saw him being celebrated and congratulated, and it was as a Playboy, only that one side of him. And I had already gotten to know the other side of him, the activist, the rebel side. Every time I meet somebody and I get to know them better, I begin to research more about them, and it's just something I do. I love researching. And on the way back from the party, flying back to Toronto, I turned to my partner, Victor, and I said, that's what I want to do next. I want to make a film that shows the other side of Hugh Hefner. And the reason I really wanted to do it is I love making films about people who are complex, whose life is complex, and where there's a lot of conflict. Movies, the best movies are filled with conflict. And that's what I decided to do. And so I began an even more intense research process to write a treatment. I FedExed it down and got a fax back from Mr. Hefner a day later, the very next day, giving me carte blanche.
He gave you carte blanche. Did he give you any specific instruction on what he wanted out of the experience?
Absolutely nothing. Nothing, ever, nothing. No, nothing written down, nothing spoken. Nobody didn't suggest this or that. He knew my films. He knew I was a good filmmaker. He left it up to me.
Yeah.
And it's one thing I really respected about him.
What fascinates me about your film, because I've seen profiles of Mr. Hefner before,
yes,
but I had no idea what you speak to, the extent of his influence in shaping society in the latter part of the last century. Of course, it's a given that sexual taboos and boundaries that he shattered those with Playboy, but I had no idea his importance in the civil rights movement, or correcting social injustices, or the influence of who he chose to put in his magazine or TV show. So when you discovered this side of him and you wanted to express it, so that was the impetus for this film. That's what you wanted to express more than anything else about him through this film.
That is the side of him that I wanted to set the record straight. I mean, many people know Hugh Hefner as the Playboy, as the man who, with many women, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the Playboy Mansion and all those things, the Playboy clubs. But very few people know about the other side. The way you just put it, I couldn't have put it better. It's absolutely true. And when I started to do my real research, when I was right upstairs at the Playboy Mansion in the third attic where the scrapbooks are kept and the over 2,000, and I just about went through all of them. The more I went through them, the more I discovered and uncovered, and the better and the more I realized all these incredible things, like the business about the two Playboy clubs in New Orleans and Miami, where they would not allow black members into their clubs. It was, they were franchises. And when Mr. Hefner found out about that, he was outraged, and he bought back the clubs, bought them back at a loss. How many people would do that? And then turned around and opened them up to all members, black, white, didn't matter. And he believed very strongly in civil, kind of standing up for civil rights and all those things. But above all, these people were his friends. Black people were his friends. All kinds of people were his friends. And there was not going to be any exclusion of people in the Playboy clubs on his television shows. No way. This was against his own integrity, his own makeup as a human being, and it didn't matter if on the shows where he showed, black people mingling with white people in a party atmosphere, which is what Playboy's penthouse was, and all these wonderful guests would come in, black and white and mixed racial groups like Lambert, Hendricks, and Ross. They were all there. Southern states would not buy these shows. It was a syndicated show. So he didn't make all the money on these shows that he could have. In fact, at one point he had to put his own money in to keep the shows going. He did. And he did never, ever, ever gave into those people that would kind of ask him to therefore, kind of not stick to his principles. He stuck to them always. And that, no matter what you think about Hugh Hefner, no matter what you think about the girls and, did he objectify women and all of that, you cannot take that away from this person, that he did make a huge difference. He changed America in many ways that we have felt, and I say we, Canada as well, the rest of the world. And by saying all this, I'm not being deferential. I have no intention of being deferential, nor is this film a Valentine to Hefner. No,
right.
It is something I wanted to set the record straight about a very complex man who people and the press has often just shown one side of, because that's the side they figure all the people want to know. It's the women, and it's the beautiful women, and it's the naked girls, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To my mind, all these incredible things that he has done for civil rights, for human rights, standing up, for all kinds of issues, much more sexy than any of the other stuff, because that's the true, profound, hard stuff that sticks around, that changes society, changes people.
Well, there are so many preconceived notions about him.
Oh, you bet.
And I'm wondering, did you have any?
If I had some, I had them when I was a young teenager and I was babysitting, and I would see this magazine, and it wasn't about him really. It was really about the magazine. I thought, well, I don't want to, it's kind of, I'm not really interested in this magazine, and and I just put it aside. It didn't kind of outrage me in any way. I just, well, okay, that's not for me. And the Playboy Mansion, when I, when I received that call, it was like so out of my sphere of who I was.
Surreal,
Yeah. I couldn't quite believe it. And then, it was real. And I try to not judge. I always believe don't judge lest you be judged. I would hate to be judged by, um, nobody should be judged. And so when I first met him, I was really more excited than anything because here I was going to meet this very incredible human being, an icon already, and it was quite extraordinary that I was going to be invited to the Playboy Mansion. And when you come up here to this incredible place where, in Los Angeles, and there are these lush grounds and animals and what few people know is that what he wanted to be many years ago as a young boy was a veterinarian. And so it's no surprise that he has a zoological license on the grounds, for the grounds, and whenever there's an animal, like an owl was hurt, the wing, she couldn't fly anymore, it was brought to the Playboy Mansion. They called and said, have you got room? Could we bring this hurt animal? And they would say yes. And there are amazing people here who look after these animals, care about these animals. It is extraordinary, just extraordinary. So it's just what he says, a Shangri-La.
Yeah, but even so, you mentioned that the movie, you didn't set out to make a Valentine by any means. It is to the film's credit and your credit that you do include voices of dissension, kind of people that do sit in judgment of Hef and what he does. Why was that important for you to include?
Because that also is part of the historical reality. When he brought up, when Playboy magazine first came out, there was an outcry. It was the first magazine of its kind. He broke new ground. He was the first to jump into the frozen lake. It wasn't frozen. I'm just using an analogy. But he was the first, And of course there would be an outcry. America, very puritanical in those days. In some ways, there is still some of that left behind. And people didn't like it. And so there were people who spoke up, people like Charles Keating, who founded the Committee for Decent Literature. And he denounced Hef totally. And I have 2 clips in the film. Very, very important. Even Mike Wallace began by not liking him, considering him an upstart, actually counted how many naked girls there were in the magazine and calls it a dirty book, and that's how he found it. And, Dennis Prager talks about him. Susan Brown Miller, the feminist, I tried to interview Gloria Steinem, tried 3 times, and she refused 3 times to be interviewed. I finally gave up. So, Pat Boone.
Right.
Christian activist, very much so, who literally believes that Hefner has broken the moral code of America. And even though today Playboy is tame by comparison to what is out there on the net and in other magazines, the point is that he was the first. So he always, that is, but, amazing when you think of it, that the magazine that he began, this very controversial magazine that took America by storm, nobody expected a Hefner. He came out of nowhere, and suddenly there it was. And many years later, suddenly there's this empire. And he uses the money and his influence and power. Many people would just use it for their own gains. He doesn't do that. He has stuck his neck out and helped and supported many, many causes, taken on many parts of government that others wouldn't dare. And so he's on the enemies list of Nixon, Reagan, past enemies of Edgar Hoover, and is under scrutiny. And many people, really dislike him enormously.
Well, I'm curious because this had to be an important project for Hef as well. So when you show him the cut of the film, when you're ready to show him the cut of the film for the first time, how are you feeling? Were you nervous about that? And how did he react to it?
Well, I was actually very excited. It was, and I remember it very well. And I showed him when it was a half hour longer than it is now, because I wanted to make sure, not because for his approval. No. but I wanted to make sure that everything was correct, that the right pictures corresponded to what was being said, and I knew that I had jumped chronology a few times and things and jumped it around, and I wanted to know if I made any mistakes, factual mistakes by doing that, and that was important to me. And he at the end, he said, absolutely, I understand what you're doing. He said, it's and he said to me, he said, you really get me, and he was very deeply moved, and it was the greatest compliment one could get, from a very perfectionistic person. I'm a perfectionist myself, so I was driven all the way through into making this as real, as even-handed, as powerful a film as I could make it, and entertaining, because it has to be entertaining. How can you make a boring film? Nobody would come to see it. So Gene Simmons is in there, and he's very, very funny.